once upon a time, immigration was used to generate wealth or time, or both. Countries like the UK or Western European, Western democracies and Americans, they would bring foreigners as a cheap labor in order to generate wealth, to make more money, get time. This changed, in my opinion, around 2010-ish. Around that time, the system moved from having immigration as a tool for making cash, money, to a tool of control. And around the same time, the system nearly lost its current power structure, mainly to Poles and other Eastern Europeans who were allowed to come to countries like the UK. I will explain it all in a minute if you want to stay with me a bit longer. You see, the UK and other Western countries right now, they have run out of places they can bring immigrants from in order to stay in power. Basically, we are at the end of the road of the current system, which was in place for the last few decades, maybe even a whole century, or at least since end of the Second World War. That's how I see it. Immigration, as I mentioned, used to be for making basically money, bring cheap labor, is now being used and has been used for the last decade or almost 2 decades as a tool of control and to fight the biggest enemy the system can have, the most influential enemy, the lethal enemy, the somebody who is not allowed to exist. And this is called middle class, which is basically you, me, and your parents back in the day, which is basically the majority of the population, the majority of the West. So, in order to explain this, and it's not going to be controversial. It used to be common sense, but if you know a little bit about history, you know about economy, as I do know about economy. I'm an entrepreneur. I used to study history back in the day when I was younger. I liked history, always liked history, but you don't have to be a professor to understand that, because of the monetary system, we have debt-based system. The governments needed to have people coming in and doing cheaper work for them, and this is also why they outsource a lot of productions to cheaper countries like Asia, India, China, and they also imported all these people from cheaper countries to keep labor cheap, to manufacture goods and do the services for them, so then the Western countries can stay making their own money and stay in the bubble of prosperity. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes in the history of humankind. We've made it as a recent civilization, thinking that what we as a West collectively achieved over the last, I say 50 years, that bubble of prosperity and never-ending growth, quote, never-ending growth, is kind of a natural thing, which we will stay like this forever, and it's always been this way, always will be this way, right? And one of the good examples of how we lost in this thinking is a current pension system, which is obviously broke. It does not work. But if you ask anyone now, everybody thinks they need to do things in order to get pension, because pension is just natural part of life. It never happened in the past, and it's not going to happen in the near future, in my opinion. The system will implode. As I say, we are at the very end of the road. And that's why we see lots of conflicts and tensions everywhere and everything, right? But we'll get to it. So if you look back in the history of civilization, the problem was always, so whoever was in the power, for them the biggest problem was always to stay in power, and they were trying to find who is the potential threat, a big king or soldiers, generals, whatever, right? Somebody influential. So they would always worry about who is the next most influential person or a country who can actually threaten them and take their power from it. And power, if you know anything about power, is a drug. It's like addiction. And that's why you also see people people compromise, and people can't get out of power, because once you're in, you need more power to stay in. And it's like getting, with this abuse of substance, you have to have more every time you do it in order to stay where you are. And it's very hard to quit. So back in the day, the king would be worried that there would be some prince or some other country strong enough, influential enough pope or somebody, right, willing to take their power, and they would mitigate the risks. For the last 50 years, we kind of manufactured this weird period in the history of human civilization where we've had all of it. We had growth, sustainability, kind of on the paper, money, peace, relative peace. I'm talking about Western countries. Obviously, there was a price paid by other countries, but we were living like, hey, it's great, right? We have pension, healthcare, cars, going holiday twice a year. Even like middle class was very strong. That was a part of it. That's where the whole middle class became extremely strong. And if you look back in the history, it was never was the case where the middle class would be so strong, because strong middle class is too influential and is a threat to the power. So over the last 50 years, you would have this kind of balanced power. Even if you think about this left and right, they were not that far from each other, right? Like, I think probably like 50 years ago, Democrats in America would be where today's Republicans are or something. Like, it's like, it was fairly close to each other, left and right, where there would be subtle differences. Maybe some, left would be more, I think even like 20 or 30 years ago, it was easier for people to be on the left, even for myself, because you would say they would still have lots of common sense. They would have more real empathy on their side, whether their right side, conservative side, would be more about money, preventing, from, I don't know, keeping the money, keeping taxes low, all these things, which are important in days like today, but 30, 40, 50 years ago were not, because everybody was living very well. So the last thing you were worried about was increasing taxes, because we're like, whatever, like, I have enough money, let's be nice to each other, right? That was the part where the power was kind of balanced. But as we started losing the grip because of the economy, whatever, there's lots of different reasons. It's a whole different topic for the video. The system started losing its power, right? Because we got much more divided. So that if you were left, you were so far from people on the right that you started hating each other, and people started losing control. So, and bringing more immigrants would not translate to generating more wealth for many different reasons as well. It's a different topic for the economists, and maybe I can talk about this one day from my perspective. But it all changed when the EU, in about 2004, I think, it opened their markets for the Eastern Europeans, Poles and other Eastern Europeans, around that time, I suppose, right? And I came in 2010, so I came in at the peak of the West being great as a whole. From then, we only went down, unfortunately, and it's not my fault, sorry. I'm a victim here. So because system was trying to bring people they could have in order to keep control, which are immigrants, that's why they opened so much for the Eastern Europeans, because they were a poor country, and people from poor countries are way more likely to be controlled. Okay, so if you bring them to countries like France or Germany or the UK, England, people will be that was the plan, at least up until now. That's how the system would think. They would stay in control. They would stay low, depending on the system, depending on some handouts, welfare money from the system, and they'll be easy to control, because if you do not behave the way the system wants, they will cut your benefits, right? And therefore, you're gonna have to behave, like basics of control, right? Social systems and all of that, and the welfare. That's how the damage it causes for everyone. It's not just for the people who pay for it, but people receiving welfare. They actually unconsciously they really hurting themselves. Again, that is a completely different topic if you want to go into details. But because of that, the system allowed to come all these Poles and Eastern European immigrants, hoping that it will continue to keep balance or keep staying in power, because suddenly you got a few million people extra from poor countries, who are not educated and maybe well enough, couldn't speak language, couldn't understand anything, and they were just sort of staying calm and quiet. And they wanted to do it to balance out a middle class which was getting angry, British or your native French, German middle class, which were getting poorer, more oppressed. So they decided, hey, we're going to bring more cheap labor. We're going to offer you sort of like a solution, hey, for your having less money, at least you can have cheaper workers. But at the same time, we're going to have a few million people who will vote for the system, because they need the system alive in order for them to stay here, depending on the welfare and everything. Now, this is where everything went according to the plan, in my opinion. The problem started, and this is why I said, and Poles almost destroyed the system, or kept England, saved England, or kept, destroyed the system. And I don't mean to be, it's controversial to say it in order to, I want you to be like, what do you mean, right? So the difference was, from what system wanted and what really happened, Polish people, and I'm talking about Poles mainly because I'm Polish, so I've known a lot of Poles, and you see where the Poland is now as a country financially is doing very well, but also other Eastern European nations. Rather than them staying poor and depending on the system, they went like, hey, hang on, there's actually lots of opportunities here. I can get this better, I can fix that. Coming from countries where you had to fight for your survival, or have to be very street smart in order to survive, or to just get better in life, move ahead in your life, and that is a communist countries. You can't be compliant and just carry on. It's like communism doesn't work this way. You're gonna have to keep up and trying different things and be street smart in order to survive, and maybe even progress in your life. So we've come with this experience and knowledge from Eastern European countries, Poles and others. We decided, like, hang on, we actually can work around many things here, and rather than staying poor, a system would want us, and depending on the system and compliant, we decided, hang on, we're going to be this naughty people, we're actually going to start building our wealth. And as you guys know now, as I am one of many Poles like this, we actually got to the point where we are no different to many natives. There's many Poles and Eastern Europeans making loads of money, having big businesses, loads of potential influence. And this is where it almost went to the point where the middle class would be rebuilt. It would be just more Poles and Eastern Europeans mixed with natives. And a part of it was also we were very similar culturally. Our cultures were similar. We were able to learn a language, Christian values, all these things, right? Europeans, we had history, decades, if not centuries, going together in and out, sometimes fighting against each other, sometimes forming alliances. But around that time, what happened was system backfired, okay? So if we would carry on this way with help of natives and maybe politicians, rather than fighting the system, if they would recognize, and I'm not blaming anyone, I don't think I would see it myself, I'm just now seeing it, looking back, thinking about this. If we would carry on getting more influential within the system and actually getting that influence translating into real life political influence, we would probably end up in a completely different Britain, which would be more European Britain, full of Eastern Europeans and Poles, and British, and Irish, and Scottish, and Welsh. And maybe for many of you natives wouldn't be great, but as you can see, we ended up in alternative reality, which is probably even worse. And it couldn't have been stopped for many reasons. Again, anyone saying it could have been stopped back then does not understand the complexity and the dynamics of macroeconomics, geopolitical, and anything, right? And I'm not claiming to be a specialist. I kind of think about this, read lots of books, and I see things. So what happened was, and this is what I mentioned in one of my previous videos, Polish people and Eastern Europeans, rather than using that influence, the material influence from big businesses and money and making decent lives, go into building a country. So go into politics, go into law, go into anything, I don't know, councils, like all these offices and governmental, the positions where you actually shape the future of the country. Poles decided to stay where they are, and they kind of like detached themselves from the reality of England. They never felt this is their home, right? That was a big problem. And they were also part of it, natives were never made them to feel this way. But again, I'm not blaming anyone, it's just my observation. So what happened was Polish people and North Europeans just started accumulating wealth and building their own lives, better cars, better house, better this and that, while integrating and still feeling welcomed, and people natives were like, yeah, that they're okay. But the system started losing the control because the system saw Poles and other Eastern Europeans as a potential threat to adding on to becoming a middle class. And that's exactly what happened. Poles and others became middle class. The exact definition of middle class, making money, going on holiday twice a year, better holidays, better car, better all of these things. So the system suddenly was like, hang on a second, if this carries on, we're going to have super unhappy middle class, English middle class who's been let down and disappointed and angry. And you're going to have another 1 million or 2 million or 3 million Eastern Europeans who will soon enough join them with their disappointment. and that'll be end game for the current system. We're going to have to come up with a new power, and then probably they will unite, and they will go to the government, they go to parliament, and they will just start making choices and differences, and it's going to be completely different. As I mentioned earlier at the beginning, the power doesn't work like that. Power, once you're in the power, you have to stay in the power for whatever it takes, because it's a drug, it's an addiction. So system could not allow a new political power to emerge, and could not allow to have middle class strength being stronger again. So what else did they have to leave? Could they be left with? Well, they started looking elsewhere just to bring people who can actually start being again counterbalance to middle class. So around the same time, as you notice, what happened was Poland became kind of successful financially country over the last 10 years. Brexit happened, of course, maybe it was part of a solution to the problem. And many Poles and Eastern Europeans decided to go back to their countries, therefore abandoning the UK and countries like France and Germany in their own problems. I don't think it was great. It would probably stay better but if they stayed, but I can't go back in time. I can't do anything about this, right? It wasn't my choice or anything like that. It's just the way, again, it's my observation. And around the same time, we started seeing as immigrants coming from all over the world to Europe and the UK, from places we can't name. I can't point half of those countries correctly in the map, right? There's somewhere in Africa, somewhere there. Like, nobody knows these places, and the people are so culturally different, so poor, and so much been there for so long poor, that their mindset, their behavior is so different to ours, that the system knows by bringing them in, they will stay dependent on the system, on the welfare, and on the, hey, we give you, but you shut up, we give you some money, that they want these people to stay in power. Paradoxically, it destroys the system itself anyway. This is what I don't understand why politicians can't see. But if you alcoholic, I suppose you can explain the danger of being alcoholic, but it doesn't mean this person dealing with the abuse, the illness of alcoholism will stop being alcoholics, right? So this is how I see the system works. They know, they understand they're destroying themselves in the system, but they can't stop. So now we're seeing these waves of people coming over because they will stay quiet. They will be dependent on the government for whatever they say in order to get some money to survive. You see, the problem may be for the system, and that was where the system fired back, and that's where we are exactly right now. The problem, I think, for the system now is, as I said, they basically eating themselves. Okay, so the leadership is basically losing control, not because there's now a strong middle class, but because everybody becomes broke class. And you have, on one side, broke immigrants who are completely different in values, language, religion, everything to what we are as a country or as a nation. And on the other side, you've got people from disappearing middle class, from poor, from even disappearing upper class, everyone becoming equally poor and hungry. And this is where the politicians are losing their all influence. And this is why the reset is here, because it's coming, because we can't carry on. There is no more places you can actually bring enough people in order to balance it all out. This is why you see this anger from all sort of places across the country, because they tried to bring enough people to keep the balance in their favor. Excuse me, but it didn't work. We're now in a position where people are too angry for this to carry on. They can't keep bringing people back to their country, back to this country, in order to stay in power. So they're going to lose that power. Where this goes later, it's a big unknown. Obviously, I can see that it's going to cost. It's going to be very bumpy road for many countries, including Britain. We're going to end up in some conflicts which are already brewing all over the place, and financial problems, and problems between communities and people who came here and didn't come, and want to come, didn't want to come. All of these differences in opinions now are actually coming out, and because they were suppressed for long, now they're coming with the biggest strength, right? It's just physics, right? If you keep pressing gas or whatever, eventually it just explodes, right? And this is where we are getting to as a country. But I think the point I'm trying to make, I hope it was clear enough, that we almost managed to win with the system, or at least destroy the system the way it is. I don't know what would be the better, if there would be other system, what would it be like? But we're not far from it. And I think Poles and Eastern Europeans are a big part of, they took part unconsciously. Nobody was, I think people wasn't expecting it, almost took part of it. And like I said, we had times back in the history, back in the day, where we helped each other. Poles help British people. Brits fight in the wars, and I know Brits help Poles times. French a little bit less, Germans even less. But you know what I mean, right? It's like we've been around for centuries, and we kind of we would get along, not kind of, with solve our problems. But right now we are not on our own. We have many others who are trying to find their own way of living here. And as much as we don't like it, or they even don't like it, it's just a new reality. And I don't know where this is going to lead to, but it's end of this journey as we know it. This is where it ends, because there's no more countries to bring people in. And it's like one more argument you often hear about is the British people Britain had to bring these immigrants because they were all coming from overseas territories, right? The empire, British Empire, French or Dutch or Spanish, colonial empires or countries under colonialism. But that is not true. I mean, if you think about this, are you trying to tell me that 50 years ago, when Britain was still a really strong country, still is, but not as it was back in the day, especially with America and France and Britain was like really strong superpowers. Are you telling me that Algeria or other countries would threaten Britain to take, or France to take people from Algeria? No, they took them because they wanted to basically, if it's going to go forever like this, we're just going to bring them in, they're going to work cheap, we're going to kind of assimilate, pay them some money, everyone's great. And it never works this way. It never works the way we think it does, right? There's always some fork in the road, and that's what happened with this country and with Europe in general. So I think that's it. I'll leave you with this. Let me know what you think. Basically, middle class is the biggest threat to the system right now. I don't think we can get back into it, and especially where we are at the end of the financial system, the way it is now. The debt is unsustainable. Nothing is sustainable. No, pensions, healthcare, none of it. We're going to have to see the implosion and destruction of the system on its own or with some help, and it will end somehow, and obviously something new will emerge. I don't know how. Do you know? Do you think? Do you know what new system would emerge from all of this? Because all I can see is going to end up in a big mess, and there will be conflicts, because the conflicts always arise from things like that. Let me know what you think. If you want to talk more about me, about you, about these problems, if you have any project you want to talk, please be my guest, join my community. I'm trying to build, I need to look into it because it's been summer holiday, so I didn't have much time to actually spend time with it. It's another week before kids go back to school. But please join the community. That's where actual conversation will be happening and more. I'll be also building I don't know, do I have any YouTube people who are interested in actually running their own YouTube channels? If there are any, please let me know in the comments, because I'm actually building something, sort of a business for myself. Another one, I'm an entrepreneur, I can't stop myself. Around actually building YouTube channels, and it's going to be different than anything else out there. So I'll be interested. Maybe I can talk about it. If not my channel, I'll talk elsewhere. But if I have any people who actually were interested to build YouTube channels, listening to me, or grow their channels, let me know. And then maybe we can have a chat. Then you can join the community, and I will tell you what happens next. And that's going to be great. I hope to be ready to release that within the next week or so. Let me know what you think. Let me if you like this video. If you have any comments, or if you know what happens next, let me know. Be respectful. Please subscribe to my channel if you're not subscribing yet. Thank you everyone for your support, for the comments, for the likes. There's few of you are always around. I really appreciate you guys. I like our conversations. I like I can't remember your name, sorry, the person who's quite often points out not points it out, was actually fixing my pronunciations. Subtle. Remember that? Subtle, not subtle, subtle. I remember that. You see, one word you said that, I said it's well received, now I know. Every time I'm thinking about subtle, I'm not going to say subtle. Or salmon. Salmon. That's very Eastern European, right? Anyway, thanks for all of you. I appreciate all of you guys, especially with the ones who keep coming back. I'm happy you're enjoying my content and staying around me, my company. I'm enjoying yours. Yeah, have a great day. I hope you will agree with my points, and hope you won't hate immigrants so much. because it's not all about the same. It's different. It's a very complex topic. And if you're an immigrant, assimilate. Now is the time, because soon it's going to be really difficult. It's going to get really to the point in the Western countries, the UK, that if you're an immigrant, people are going to look back at what you were saying, what you're thinking, and going to say, okay, you are not part of it. And there will be some consequences, I suppose. That's how I feel it. By the way, have a great day. Cheers.